The sound of sirens cutting through a warm Florida night. Red and blue lights flicker across palm trees in what should have been a peaceful suburb. On May 15, 2023, 17-year-old Marcus Thompson thought his life was just beginning. He'd spent months planning the perfect prom night with his girlfriend Sarah, saved up for a tuxedo rental, even practiced his dancing in his bedroom mirror when no one was looking. Instead, that night would mark the beginning of the most unthinkable betrayal, infected by someone who was supposed to protect him, someone who lived under the same roof and called him family. And when the devastating truth finally came to light months later, it would lead to murder. A torn corsage left on a hospital floor, the steady beep of monitors tracking a young life hanging in the balance, and a mugshot that would shock an entire community. This is the story of how one family's darkest secret turned a celebration into a nightmare, and how betrayal can destroy everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. Before we go deeper into this shocking case, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What drives someone to intentionally harm an innocent teenager on what should be the best night of their young life? Who was the person behind this calculated betrayal? Someone trusted with the most vulnerable members of the family. Why would anyone target a 17-year-old boy who had his whole future ahead of him? College applications pending, a girlfriend he adored, dreams of playing college football. And how could a single prom night secret create a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, tearing apart not just one family but an entire Florida community? The victim, Marcus Thompson, a beloved high school senior whose face friends would remember lit up with excitement just hours before everything changed. The perpetrator, someone who should have been protecting him, whose silhouette would later haunt courtroom proceedings. The father, a man who thought he'd found love again, completely unaware of the monster living in his own home. But the darkest secret was still hidden inside this seemingly perfect blended family, a secret that would take months to surface, and when it did, it would demand the ultimate price. Marcus Thompson was everything you'd want in an American teenager growing up in the suburbs of Orlando, Florida. At 17, he stood 6 feet tall with an easy smile that made teachers remember his name, and coaches want him on their teams. He played varsity football for the Riverside High Ravens, maintaining a 3.4 GPA while working part-time at a local sporting goods store to save money for college. His friends described him as the kind of guy who would give you his last dollar if you needed it, someone who remembered everyone's birthday and never missed a family dinner when he could help it. Marcus had been raised by his father, David Thompson, since he was 12, after his biological mother passed away from cancer. The loss had brought father and son closer together, creating a bond that everyone in their circle admired. David, a 42-year-old electrician, had worked double shifts for years to provide for Marcus, never dating seriously until he met Rebecca Martinez at a church barbecue 3 years earlier. Rebecca seemed like an answer to prayers. At 36, she was a licensed practical nurse who worked at a nearby urgent care clinic, someone who understood long hours and family responsibilities. She brought homemade cookies to school functions, remembered the names of Marcus's teammates, and seemed genuinely interested in his future plans. When she moved in with David and Marcus 2 years ago, neighbors commented on how natural the family looked together. David finally had someone to share the load. Marcus had a maternal figure who attended his games, and Rebecca appeared to have found her place in a ready-made family. She drove a silver Honda Civic with a soccer mom sticker despite not having children of her own, kept fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and made sure Marcus had his favorite snacks stocked in the pantry. To anyone looking from the outside, the Thompson household had successfully blended into something beautiful and functional. But beneath Rebecca's nurturing exterior, there were small signs that something wasn't quite right, though no one could have predicted how wrong things would go. David's sister Linda later recalled feeling uncomfortable during family gatherings, noticing how Rebecca would find reasons to be alone with Marcus, helping him with homework in his room, offering to drive him to practice when David was available, insisting on doing his laundry personally. When Linda mentioned her concerns to David, he dismissed them as adjustment issues, explaining that Rebecca was simply trying to bond with her stepson. Marcus himself seemed happy enough with the arrangement, appreciating having someone who packed his lunches and attended his games when his father's work schedule conflicted. The teenager was focused on his senior year milestones, college applications, football season, and planning the perfect prom night with his girlfriend, Sarah Mitchell, whom he'd been dating for 8 months. Sarah was a cheerleader with plans to study nursing at the University of Central Florida, and their relationship was the kind that made other teenagers envious. They studied together, attended school dances, and had already started talking about trying to attend the same college. For prom, Marcus had saved for months to rent a black tuxedo and had secretly planned to surprise Sarah with a limousine ride to dinner before the dance. Rebecca had offered to help with the planning, insisting on taking Marcus shopping for his tuxedo and even volunteering to pick up Sarah's corsage from the florist. At the time, David thought his girlfriend was being wonderfully supportive of his son's big night. But what happened after prom would leave this entire town reeling, and the perfect family that neighbors admired would be revealed as something much darker and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Prom night started exactly as Marcus had dreamed. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his face glowing with excitement as David took photos of him and Sarah on the front porch. Sarah wore a powder blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her smile was radiant as Marcus slipped the corsage onto her wrist with shaking hands. Rebecca stood in the background, offering to take pictures and complimenting how grown up they both looked. The couple left in the limousine Marcus had surprised Sarah with, heading first to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown before joining their classmates at the Riverside Convention Center for the dance itself. According to friends who were there, Marcus and Sarah were inseparable on the dance floor, laughing and taking selfies with their group. They were voted cutest couple by their classmates, an honor that made Marcus beam with pride as he accepted the small trophy. The dance ended at midnight, and most students headed to various after-parties around town. Marcus and Sarah chose to attend a gathering at their friend Jake's house, where about 20 students planned to watch movies and hang out until dawn, a wholesome end to their high school prom experience. However, around 2 a.m., Marcus received a text message from Rebecca saying there was a family emergency and he needed to come home immediately. Sarah offered to come with him, but Marcus assured her he'd handle whatever was wrong and return to the party. He kissed her goodnight in Jake's driveway, promising to call her in the morning, and drove his father's Toyota Camry home to see what Rebecca needed. This would be the last normal moment of Marcus Thompson's young life. Security cameras from a neighbor's house would later show Marcus pulling into the driveway at 2:47 a.m., and his phone records confirmed he texted Sarah at 3:15 a.m., saying everything was fine and he'd see her tomorrow. What happened in the Thompson house between 2:47 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. would remain Rebecca's secret for months. David was working an overnight shift at a new construction site across town, not expected home until Sunday evening. Marcus found Rebecca waiting for him in the living room, wearing a white nightgown and appearing to have been crying. She told him that David had been in an accident and was in the hospital, but she didn't want to worry him during prom until she knew more details. Marcus immediately wanted to go to the hospital, but Rebecca convinced him that visiting hours were over and they should wait until morning. She offered him a glass of water and something to help him sleep, explaining that she'd given him one of her anxiety medications to help calm his nerves about his father. What Marcus didn't know was that Rebecca had dissolved something much more dangerous into that glass of water, something that would make him vulnerable to what she planned to do next. The medication made Marcus drowsy within minutes, and Rebecca helped him to his bedroom, claiming she wanted to make sure he was comfortable. Security footage would later show that David's work truck never left the construction site that night. There had been no accident, no emergency, no reason for Marcus to come home early from his prom celebration. Rebecca had orchestrated the entire scenario to get Marcus alone and vulnerable. Over the next several hours, while Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, Rebecca committed an act so unthinkable that even seasoned detectives would struggle to understand her motivation. She deliberately infected him with HIV, a virus she had been carrying for years, but had hidden from David and everyone else in her life. The method was calculated and cruel, designed to ensure transmission while leaving Marcus with no memory of exactly what had occurred. But the consequences of that night wouldn't fully reveal themselves for weeks, and when they did, they would trigger a murder that shattered everything. If you're still watching, type "still here" in the comments so we know you're following this shocking story. Marcus woke up Sunday afternoon feeling disoriented and sick to his stomach, with only fragmented memories of coming home the night before. Rebecca was in the kitchen making breakfast, acting completely normal and asking about his prom experience as if nothing unusual had happened. When Marcus asked about his father's accident, Rebecca claimed there had been a miscommunication and David was actually fine, working his regular shift. She suggested that Marcus might be coming down with a flu bug and should rest for the day. David returned home Sunday evening to find his son looking pale and tired, but attributed it to the excitement and late night of prom. Over the following weeks, Marcus began experiencing symptoms that initially seemed like a persistent cold, fatigue, headaches, and a general feeling of being unwell that wouldn't go away no matter how much he rested. By the end of May, Marcus was struggling to maintain his energy levels for football training and his part-time job. His grades, which had been solid throughout his senior year, began to slip as he found it difficult to concentrate. Sarah noticed the change immediately, worried about her boyfriend's sudden lack of energy and enthusiasm for activities he'd always loved. When Marcus missed their 8-month anniversary dinner because he felt too sick to leave the house, Sarah convinced him to see a doctor. The initial visit to their family physician resulted in routine blood work and a diagnosis of stress and exhaustion related to graduation and college preparation. However, when the symptoms persisted and worsened over the summer, David insisted on more comprehensive testing. The results of those tests would change everything the Thompson family thought they knew about their lives. In August, 3 months after prom night, Marcus tested positive for HIV. The diagnosis hit the family like a lightning bolt, leaving everyone confused and searching for explanations. Marcus was a virgin who had never experimented with drugs or engaged in any high-risk behaviors. His relationship with Sarah had been innocent and age-appropriate, and she tested negative for the virus, eliminating the possibility of sexual transmission between the teenage couple. David was tested and also came back negative, which should have been reassuring, but only deepened the mystery of how his son had become infected. The family physician referred them to an infectious disease specialist, who confirmed the diagnosis and began asking detailed questions about Marcus's activities and potential exposure sources. The specialist explained that HIV doesn't typically appear out of nowhere. There had to be a specific incident or exposure that could account for the infection. As word of Marcus's diagnosis spread through their close-knit community, whispers and speculation began to follow the family everywhere they went. Some people assumed Marcus had been engaging in secret behaviors typical of teenagers, while others wondered if there had been a medical accident or contaminated needle somewhere. The football team rallied around their teammate, organizing fundraisers for his medical expenses, but the social stigma was undeniable. Marcus found himself isolated from many of his peers, struggling not only with his health, but with the shame and confusion of carrying a virus he couldn't explain. Sarah remained loyal and supportive, but her parents became uncomfortable with her continued relationship with Marcus, creating additional stress for both teenagers. David threw himself into researching HIV transmission, desperate to understand how his son had been infected and what they could do to manage his condition. The investigation began in September when Detective Maria Santos of the Orlando Police Department received a call from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the infectious disease specialist treating Marcus. Dr. Walsh explained that she was required by law to report cases of HIV infection in minors to ensure there hadn't been any sexual abuse or other criminal activity. Detective Santos opened a case file and began interviewing the Thompson family, starting with the assumption that someone had harmed Marcus, but unclear about who or how. During her initial interviews, Detective Santos noticed something that struck her as odd. Rebecca seemed unusually knowledgeable about HIV transmission and treatment, asking detailed questions about viral loads and medication protocols that seemed beyond what a concerned stepmother might typically know. When Detective Santos ran a routine background check on all family members, she discovered that Rebecca had been treated for HIV at a clinic in Miami 5 years earlier, a fact she had hidden from David and everyone else in Orlando. But the real horror was still to come, and it would take a life. The evidence that would ultimately convict Rebecca Martinez came from an unexpected source: her own computer. In October, as Detective Santos was building her case around the HIV transmission, David Thompson made a discovery that would blow the investigation wide open. While using Rebecca's laptop to pay bills, he accidentally opened her email account and found a folder labeled Research that contained hundreds of searches about HIV transmission methods, legal penalties for intentional infection, and detailed medical articles about how to ensure successful viral transmission. The search history dated back to February, 3 months before prom night, indicating that Rebecca had been planning her attack on Marcus for months. Among the saved articles was a step-by-step guide to drugging someone without their knowledge and ensuring HIV transmission through specific methods that matched exactly what had happened to Marcus on prom night. David immediately contacted Detective Santos, who obtained a warrant to search Rebecca's computer and medical records. What they found painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and resentment toward her teenage stepson. In Rebecca's private journal, kept in a password-protected file, she wrote extensively about her anger toward Marcus for taking David's attention away from her, and her belief that the teenager was trying to turn his father against her. She described feeling like an outsider in the Thompson household, convinced that David loved Marcus more than he could ever love her. The journal entries became increasingly hostile over time, with Rebecca fantasizing about ways to hurt Marcus and eliminate him from their family dynamic. The final entry, dated 3 days before prom, contained a detailed plan for how she would drug and infect Marcus, believing that an HIV-positive stepson would become David's financial and emotional burden, potentially driving him to choose Rebecca over his son. The medical records revealed that Rebecca had been diagnosed with HIV in 2018, but had been on successful antiretroviral therapy that suppressed her viral load to undetectable levels. However, in the weeks leading up to prom night, she had deliberately stopped taking her medication, allowing her viral load to increase dramatically and making transmission much more likely. Dr. Walsh confirmed that Rebecca's actions were not only premeditated, but showed a sophisticated understanding of how to maximize the chance of infecting Marcus. The evidence was so overwhelming that when Detective Santos arrested Rebecca in November, she confessed almost immediately, expressing no remorse for her actions, but instead claiming that Marcus deserved it for making her feel unwelcome in her own home. The revelation devastated David Thompson, who realized that the woman he'd trusted with his son's well-being had been planning to destroy Marcus for months while living under their roof and pretending to love their family. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Rebecca had attended Marcus's football games while plotting to ruin his life, had helped plan his prom while preparing to attack him that very night, and had comforted the family during his illness while knowing she was the cause of his suffering. The community was equally shocked, struggling to reconcile the caring nurse they thought they knew with the monster who had deliberately infected a teenager out of jealousy and spite. As Rebecca sat in jail awaiting trial, public outrage reached a fever pitch, with many calling for the death penalty despite Florida's laws regarding HIV transmission cases. But the story was far from over. In December, while Rebecca was in custody, David received a phone call that would change everything once again. Marcus, who had been responding well to his HIV treatment and trying to rebuild his life, had been found dead in his bedroom, apparently having overdosed on sleeping pills. The note he left behind was brief but devastating. "I can't live with what she did to me. I can't carry this for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, Dad." The suicide transformed Rebecca's case from intentional HIV transmission to felony murder, as prosecutors argued that her actions had directly caused Marcus's death. The trial that followed would expose the full extent of Rebecca's manipulation and cruelty, but it would also reveal another shocking twist that no one saw coming. The emotional peak of this tragedy was yet to be reached, and when it was, it would leave an entire courtroom in disbelief. The murder trial of Rebecca Martinez began in March 2024, with prosecutor Amanda Chen arguing that Rebecca's deliberate infection of Marcus Thompson constituted felony murder because it directly led to his suicide. The courtroom was packed with community members, Marcus's former teammates, and family friends who came to seek justice for a young man whose life had been stolen by someone he trusted. David Thompson, now a broken man who had lost everything he cared about, testified about his son's decline after the infection and his own guilt for bringing Rebecca into their home. Sarah Mitchell, now a college freshman, tearfully described how Marcus had changed after his diagnosis, becoming withdrawn and hopeless despite her efforts to support him. The testimony painted a picture of a vibrant teenager whose future had been destroyed by one woman's jealousy and cruelty. Rebecca's defense attorney, James Harrison, attempted to argue that his client's actions, while reprehensible, could not be directly linked to Marcus's suicide months later. He claimed that Marcus had been receiving therapy and medical treatment for his HIV, and that his decision to take his own life was influenced by multiple factors beyond Rebecca's original crime. However, the prosecution presented evidence that Rebecca had continued to psychologically torment Marcus even after her arrest, sending him letters from jail that detailed other sexual encounters she claimed to have had while infected, designed to make him believe he might have infected Sarah or other people in his life. These letters, which violated a court order prohibiting contact with the victim, showed that Rebecca's cruelty toward Marcus extended far beyond the initial infection and continued right up until his death. The testimony of Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychiatrist who had been treating Marcus, proved crucial to the prosecution's case. Dr. Williams explained that Marcus had been making progress in therapy and had even begun to express hope about his future before receiving Rebecca's letters from jail. She testified that the teenager's suicide was directly triggered by Rebecca's psychological manipulation, designed to convince him that he was a danger to everyone he loved. The jury also heard from other inmates at the county jail who testified that Rebecca had bragged about destroying that little brat and had laughed when she heard about Marcus's suicide. One inmate, Patricia Bird, testified that Rebecca had told her the infection was just the beginning of her revenge against the Thompson family. But the most shocking revelation came during the final week of testimony, when Detective Santos announced that the investigation had uncovered evidence of another victim. Rebecca had been married briefly in 2019 to a man named Carlos Rodriguez, who had died of AIDS-related complications in 2020. Carlos's family had always assumed he had contracted HIV through his work as an emergency medical technician, but hospital records showed that he had tested negative for HIV just months before meeting Rebecca. When his medical records were re-examined, investigators found the same pattern of mysterious infection and rapid decline that Marcus had experienced. Rebecca had killed before, using the same method, and had been perfecting her technique for years. The discovery that Marcus was not her first victim sent shockwaves through the courtroom and ensured that Rebecca would face the maximum possible sentence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on charges of felony murder, intentional transmission of HIV, and harassment of a victim. Judge Robert Chen sentenced Rebecca Martinez to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling her crimes among the most calculated and cruel acts of betrayal this court has ever witnessed. As the sentence was read, Rebecca showed no emotion, while David Thompson wept openly in the gallery, finally seeing justice for his murdered son. The judge also ordered Rebecca to pay restitution to the Thompson family for Marcus's medical expenses and funeral costs, though David later said that no amount of money could ever compensate for what she had taken from him. In her final statement to the court, Rebecca continued to show no remorse, claiming that she was the real victim of a family that had never accepted her, The community breathed a collective sigh of relief when Rebecca was led away in shackles, but the damage she had caused would last forever. The story of Marcus Thompson and Rebecca Martinez forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the people we trust and the dangers that can lurk within our own families. How could a licensed healthcare professional, someone trained to heal and protect others, deliberately infect an innocent teenager with a life-threatening virus simply out of jealousy and spite? The betrayal runs deeper than most of us can comprehend. Rebecca lived with the Thompson family for 2 years, attending school functions and family dinners, while secretly plotting to destroy a 17-year-old boy whose only crime was being loved by his father. She kissed David goodbye each morning while planning to murder his son, helped Marcus with homework while researching how to ruin his future, and comforted the family during his illness while knowing she was the cause of their pain. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is how preventable it was. There were warning signs that David's sister Linda noticed but couldn't quite articulate, behaviors that seemed slightly off but not alarming enough to trigger serious concern. Rebecca's insistence on being alone with Marcus, her unusual knowledge about his activities and schedules, and her efforts to insert herself into every aspect of his life should have raised red flags. But hindsight is always clearer than foresight, and David Thompson was simply a single father grateful to have found someone willing to help him raise his son. The tragedy reminds us that predators often disguise themselves as helpers, using our need for support and companionship to gain access to our most vulnerable family members. Marcus Thompson should be alive today, probably finishing his sophomore year of college, maybe still dating Sarah Mitchell, definitely making his father proud with his accomplishments and growth. Instead, he became the victim of a woman so consumed by jealousy that she was willing to commit murder to eliminate him from her life. His story serves as a warning about the importance of background checks, open communication with our children, and trusting our instincts when something feels wrong in our family dynamics. It also highlights the devastating impact of HIV criminalization cases, where the virus becomes a weapon in the hands of someone evil enough to use it. The ripple effects of Rebecca's crimes extended far beyond Marcus and David. They traumatized an entire community, destroyed trust among neighbors, and left lasting scars on everyone who knew and loved Marcus Thompson. What's your take on this story? Do you think justice was truly served with Rebecca's life sentence, or should she have faced the death penalty for taking Marcus's life? Should there be mandatory HIV testing and disclosure requirements for people entering blended families? How can we better protect our children from predators who hide behind masks of care and concern? Let us know in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspectives help shape how we tell these important stories. And if you thought this case was shocking, wait until you hear about the stepfather who convinced an entire town he was a hero, while secretly planning to eliminate his stepchildren one by one. That story is coming next week, and it proves that sometimes the person everyone trusts most is the one you should fear the most. Subscribe now so you never miss these true crime stories that prove reality can be darker than any fiction. Until next time, stay safe and trust your instincts. They might save your life.